Today's episode of Let's Talk Drones is one that I have been really excited to get to, but I just haven't had the time. Lots of obligations in life, my career, and some of the projects that I'm working on or involved with have really pushed this video further and further back onto the back burner. But I finally found a few hours today to sit down, collect my thoughts, and be able to share them with you in video format on the GEPRC MARK5 freestyle drone, complete with the DJI O3 Air Unit. Can't wait to share my thoughts and feelings with you on this little drone. So without further ado, let's talk drones. So like I said, it's been a long time coming for this review. I think I purchased this about a month and a half, maybe 2 months ago, and it's been a drone that I've been flying pretty much daily as long as the weather permits it. And that's a longer term period of ownership on a drone than you're used to seeing when I do a review video here. Typically, I have a review turned around in about 10 to 15 business days, and usually that's because a lot of the manufacturers that send me drones to review require them back in a pretty prompt manner. So this is obviously an exception to that rule because I purchased this myself. And I've got a lot of time behind the sticks on it. I've become very familiar with it. And so I'm very, very confident that this review is going to be super helpful. Not that the other ones weren't, but this one, I've got tons of exposure to this drone and tons of time flying it. So let's go ahead and start out like we normally do with the build quality on the GEPRC MARK5 freestyle drone. I love the build quality on this drone. Now, in terms of freestyle and FPV drones, we know that the flight time is something that usually suffers with those types of drones. And in this case, I don't know if a heavier build is necessarily what most freestyle pilots would want. This feels heavy in the hand, but I like it because it gives me peace of mind that I know when I crash this thing, it's probably gonna be able to take a hit. It's made of mostly carbon fiber on the frame, and then these little orange pieces here, less the propellers, are TPU 3D printed material. So it's sturdy, it's pliable, but it can take a hit when you crash, which I've been fortunate enough to only have one crash with this drone. Handled it like an absolute champ. So the build quality on this is definitely not something you need to worry too much about. The only thing I don't like about the build quality on this drone is the way that the arms are laid out. Now, this is a traditional build for an FPV drone. It's got that X-frame style build. So that means that your arms on your drone make the shape of an X. And that's usually just fine. Now, the problem with this is we are using the O3 Air Unit, and that's a problem for two reasons. First and foremost, the field of view on the O3 Air Unit is super, super wide. You can dial that in, but even the most dialed in field of view setting on this Air Unit is still really wide compared to some other settings you can have for other FPV Air Units and camera systems. That causes a problem because the O3 Air Unit is essentially the same system that the DJI Avata uses. So if you're familiar with that and my thoughts on that camera, be prepared to have those change. Over time, I've become more and more friendly to the idea of the quality coming out of this camera, which means that I am able to use it either as my main source of footage for projects or for a backup source of footage. Either way, if I'm relying on this footage at all, I can't have propellers getting into the screen, and that's exactly what happens with this particular build. Because the field of view is so wide, and because the frame sits the arms and the propellers out so far in front of the camera's field of view, you always have propellers in the field of view of the camera on board the drone. So the O3 Air Unit camera is always going to pick up propellers. I've played with it as much as I possibly could. It just ruins all of the footage because you can always see propellers. Now, to remedy this, GEPRC has come out with a dead cat frame for this drone, which means that it's going to take these arms and actually move them back. That'll move the propellers out of the way of the camera, but that's a lot of hassle for somebody that might not have a lot of know-how when it comes to breaking down a drone build like this and replacing parts such as the frame and the bottom plates. Just to tease a little bit of content that'll be coming up in the very near future, we will be doing a frame swap for the MARK5 drone. We're gonna be taking this frame, the X frame, we're gonna be swapping it out for that dead cat frame, which I have ordered. So really excited about that video, but that's gonna be our remedy to the solution. Overall, really enjoyed the build on this drone. It's just that one piece of the build that ruins it for me and sort of loses a lot of points in this particular category for the drone. All in all though, the build on this is something I'm really happy about. The quality is great. It feels sturdy, solid in your hands. Again, the only place that it lost points was the fact that the standard build, that X-frame, just ruins any footage that you could collect off of the O3 Air Unit, and for that reason, the GEPRC MARK5 freestyle drone gets a 7 out of 10 in build quality. Next, let's talk about the controller setup for the MARK5. Now, this isn't a knock against GEPRC or the MARK5 because they can't really help it. The only thing they could have done is avoided bringing the O3 Air Unit in for the drone. You can buy a different version of the MARK5 without the O3 Air Unit, but if you get this particular model, be prepared to have no variability in your controller setup. You can only use this FPV controller from DJI. I think this is the version 2 controller. This is the only one that you're able to use with the MARK5 with the O3 Air Unit. That's sort of a bummer for me. Now, this isn't really that bad of a controller. I actually do enjoy using this, but I'm familiar and very, very comfortable with the original DJI FPV controller, the big black boxy one. It's got a better feel to it. I'm more familiar with it from flying my GEPRC Cinelog 35. It's my preferred FPV controller. Nothing against this, it's solid, but I just don't get the same feel from this, and I don't feel as comfortable when using this controller. I know ergonomically speaking, it should actually be better because you've got the handles on the controller, but it makes it a little bit more difficult for me to actually pinch and have full control over the drone while I'm flying it. So because you can only use this controller with the O3 Air Unit version of the MARK5, I'm giving the MARK5 a 6 out of 10 on controller setup. Next, we'll talk about user interface. It's pretty straightforward. This is a true plug-and-play FPV drone. It's pre-built, it's ready to go, and I gotta tell you, it's easy to get set up. The manual that comes with it is very, very brief, but it gets right to the point and it makes it easy to understand how you get started flying this drone. I can speak from experience here that if you're new to FPV, or you're not new, but maybe you're just as green as I am when it comes to the higher level stuff like tuning your drone through beta flight, it does make it a little bit complex. So if you get into a higher level of flying an FPV drone like this and you want to play with your rates and the tuning on your drone and the controller, it is a little bit difficult to understand. There's a big learning curve getting into that, and I can speak from experience on that. Jumping into beta flight has been overwhelming. But the more time you put into it, the more resources you look into when it comes to understanding beta flight, the easier it gets, and it'll become sort of second nature to you. I'm by no means an expert at beta flight, not even close to it at all, but I've come a long way from when I started in understanding that application and how to use it effectively in your FPV drone. All in all, user interface gets a 7 out of 10 for the MARK5. Now, let's talk about maybe one of the most important categories, especially for an FPV freestyle drone, that is flight characteristics. The flight characteristics on this thing are just amazing. It is tuned really well right out of the box, super easy to get acclimated to, and it just handles so smoothly. Not to mention, it is punchy AF. I mean, this thing has got a ton of power. If you need to bail out of something and just shoot straight up in the sky to sort of get away from an obstacle, this thing will get you out of there in no time at all. It's got a metric ton of power. It's crazy how powerful this drone is, and to see something so powerful and so capable and so fast but so easy to handle is an awesome, awesome testament to this particular drone. This is great if you're considering getting into FPV, or if you're an intermediate, maybe even a lower level advanced pilot. This is a really great drone to try and to sort of get used to while you're flying. The only area that this lost points for me in terms of flight characteristics was in battery sag. And that's not something that's necessarily easily mitigated, especially for a pre-built quad like this. Every time I did some sort of a trick, it seemed like the battery sag was really, really severe, to the point that I would have 24 volts and I would drop down to almost 21 volts when I do something like a power loop. Now, I know that that's demanding of power from the battery, and that's where you see that sag, but I've seen battery sag before, and that just doesn't seem right to me. Maybe it is, maybe this is just my greenness showing through, but it was just not something that I'm familiar with or something that I found common in previous drones that I've flown, freestyle, Cinewhoop, whatever, and it is a little bit scary when you do a stunt in the air like a barrel roll, a power loop, what have you, and you see your battery level drop that much. It recovers really, really quickly, which is great, but again, the sag is just a bit concerning. Aside from that though, absolutely no complaints on the flight characteristics of this drone. It's a really, really fun fly, especially if you got some time in manual mode and you know what you're doing, you're pretty confident behind the sticks. This is a ton of fun, and for that reason, the GEPRC MARK5 freestyle drone gets a 9 out of 10 in flight characteristics. Now let's talk flight time. Now, we already know that FPV drones especially suffer from terrible flight times in comparison to GPS drones. You're always going to have very, very short flight times, especially when you get into freestyle, which demands more and more power from the batteries. Now, I'm using the recommended battery configuration from GEPRC for the Mark5. I'm using the Tattu R-Line 1550 milliamp hour 130C batteries. These tend to do really, really well. This particular configuration does really, really well with the Mark5. And again, that configuration comes recommended by GEPRC. While using those batteries, I've seen flight times anywhere between 6 and 8 minutes.
Hey drone pilots, are you looking to try a new drone? Something different, cutting edge, and capable. The Droning Company is giving away a Spartacus Hurricane to one lucky winner. The Spartacus Hurricane by Aqualine Drones is a fully equipped commercial UAV that sends mission data to the cloud in real time, making information available quickly and easily. Enter by scanning the QR code on your screen. Don't wait. Contest ends July 30th, 2023. No purchase necessary. State rules apply. Only valid to residents of the United States. This is your chance to have a Spartacus Hurricane by Aqualine Drones. A $5,400 value, yours free upon winning. Enter for your chance to win with the Droning Company. Yeah!
Now, that's when I'm flying really fast, I'm pushing this drone to its limit, I'm doing stunts, I've pretty much got the throttle wide open when I'm getting 6 to 8 minutes of flight time. When you consider that, it's pretty good for a freestyle drone. I have to say, it's better than I thought it would be. When I'm just cruising, trying to get more cinematic style shots, maybe some longer range stuff over top of a cornfield, but I'm not going super fast, I'm not doing stunts, I'm just sort of gliding, I can get anywhere between 10 and 12 minutes of flight time. It really just depends on how you use the drone in this particular situation. But 6 to 8 minutes when pushing it really hard, and 10 to 12 minutes when sort of just cruising and having a good time, that's pretty solid for an FPV freestyle drone, and for that reason, the GEPRC Mark5 gets an 8 out of 10 in flight time. Next, we're going to cover the camera performance on the GEPRC Mark5. Now, it's got the DJI O3 Air Unit, which, if you're familiar with my review on the DJI Avata's camera, then you'll know that I had some pretty negative things to say about it, all things considered. And I just want to let you know that over the course of time, my opinion has changed. I've become much more favorable to this camera system than I ever thought I would be. The footage off of this camera is extremely usable in a professional application if you have it set up right. The color science is fantastic. When you go from decine-alike, you can actually bring some flexibility out of your footage and play with it in post. It's a really solid piece of camera tech, and I'm really happy with the footage that comes off of the onboard camera on this drone, especially coming from the world of the DJI Air Unit OG and the Caddx Vista and the things that I've used to fly on when I would fly FPV. It is a rough comparison. It's worlds beyond where we've ever been with FPV cameras, and I gotta say, I really appreciate DJI upgrading their Air Unit and bringing this level of performance to the onboard camera. Even if you don't want to use this professionally, the feed that you get through your goggles, and I'm still using the older DJI FPV goggles, is crystal clear. It's beautiful footage. I really don't have any issue when it comes to seeing obstacles such as wires or branches without leaves or things that would be harder to see in that older Air Unit or in some other FPV configuration. This thing is crystal clear and I really like the feed. The only negative that I have for the camera performance is actually something that isn't related to the camera's actual performance. Again, it comes back to the build on the drone. The propellers are in the shot, which means that all of the footage that you get from this with this build of the Mark5 is completely ruined. You can't use it in a professional application. You could use it on social media, but even then, if you were going for like a cinematic look and really trying to showcase your footage, the propellers are going to distract away from that. It's totally unusable as long as that's a problem, so you're going to have to convert to the dead cat frame to get the true power out of the onboard camera system in the DJI O3 Air Unit. And what I particularly appreciate about the camera on this is that it has the Rocksteady technology built into it. So you don't need to worry about whether or not your footage is stabilized. It will do it for you automatically as you're flying. Now you can turn the Rocksteady off and just take the footage as is and then run it through some sort of stabilization on your PC or your editing laptop. But if you want to just save yourself the time and the hassle, just turn on the Rocksteady. It is awesome digital stabilization developed by DJI. I rely on it, and it makes all of my footage really, really smooth. All things considered, the beautiful imagery that comes out of this camera, the Rocksteady stabilization, and the problem that we have with the propeller setup and the fact that you can't use the footage as long as the props are in the camera's field of view, I give the camera performance on the GEPRC MARK5 a 9 out of 10. So Other and Intangibles sort of speaks to all of GEPRC's drones. It's not just this one, but we will frame this category as it relates to this drone and its capabilities as far as its intangibles go. What I love about GEPRC and the Mark5 is its customizability. I can literally swap the frame out. I can play with the tuning, with the rates, I can play with the parts, the motors. I can swap things on and off like I would with a drone that I built from the ground up. And it works. GEPRC has got this down. The whole system is super modular in that respect. And I really appreciate that they built a drone that is ready to fly right out of the box and super easy to fly, especially if you're new to FPV, or maybe you're just an intermediate or even a low-end advanced pilot. It's one of those deals where if you pull this out of the box and fly it as is, it's great. And if you want to customize it a little bit and change how it flies up just a bit, you can do that too, and it's going to respond really, really well. And like I said earlier, I'll be exemplifying this stance that I've taken on GEPRC and the modularity and the ease of customization on their platforms when I swap this frame out for the dead cat frame in a video coming very, very soon. On top of that, again, tuning and changing the rates on this drone is super easy through Betaflight as long as you have a little bit of exposure to Betaflight in the past. And what I really like about this is that you can actually use the SpeedyBee app on your mobile device, which is basically Betaflight on your phone, to do your tuning and your rate changes in the field. You don't even have to go back and plug your drone into your computer to change the rates on Betaflight. If you need to just make a quick tweak in the field, you can do that via the SpeedyBee app out in the field. Something that we haven't really seen in many other drones, and is a really cool feature of this particular drone. Keeping all of that in consideration, Intangibles for the GEPRC Mark5 gets an 8 out of 10. So going over the scores on the GEPRC Mark5 freestyle drone, complete with the DJI O3 Air Unit. In build quality, we gave it a 7 out of 10. In the controller setup, we gave it a 6 out of 10. User interface, it scored a 7 out of 10. Flight characteristics, it scored a 9 out of 10. Flight time, it scored an 8 out of 10. Camera performance, a 9 out of 10. And in Intangibles, it scored an 8 out of 10. That gives us a combined total score of 54 out of 70, giving us a final average score of 7.7 out of 10. All in all, this is an extremely fun drone to fly. I have had a blast flying this thing, and it's actually my new favorite flight. I would rather go out and fly this than any of the other drones that I have. There are a few places that it lost points for me. Of course, the controller setup doesn't have enough variability for my liking. I'd love to be able to use my old FPV controller on this setup. And of course, the X frame on this particular build of the drone, again, you can buy it pre-built with the dead cat frame, but if you buy this version, be prepared to have propellers in your feed. But other than that, man, this is nearly a perfect FPV drone in terms of experience, camera performance, and flight time. It's just so much fun to fly, and you can fly it for a lot longer than I ever thought you'd be able to. And again, that footage that comes off of the onboard camera is great for your in-goggle feed, as well as potential use in client projects and your own pet projects. It's just so much fun to fly. I have really very few things to say bad about it, but I want to know what your opinions are after watching this video. Is this a drone that you would consider buying as an FPV solution, a freestyle solution, or just something that gives you a little bit more speed on those cinematic takes? Let me know down in the comments below. If you do like this drone, you like what you see on this video review, and you're considering buying it yourself or any other GEPRC product, use the affiliate link I have down below in the description of this video. It doesn't cost you anything extra, and it kicks back a little bit of that sale out to me, which helps a lot because then I put this money back into the channel so we can make cooler and cooler content. Maybe buy a few more drones from GEPRC and show you what these things are really capable of. If you liked this video, hit the thumbs up icon too. It helps me out a lot, helps get this video out into the algorithm to more drone enthusiasts like yourself. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button. It helps me out a lot. And if you really like this content, you love drone content shot by drones, made about drones, and for drone pilots, this is the channel for you. Hit the bell icon. You'll get a notification every time I post a new video. Until next time, I'm Chris, the Drone Geek, and I am out of here. See ya.